Declaration of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Dignitas Infinita, on Human Dignity. During the Congresso of 15th March 2019, the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith decided to commence the drafting of a text highlighting the indispensable nature of the dignity of the human person in Christian anthropology and illustrating the significance and beneficial implications of the concept in the social, political, and economic realms, while also taking into account the latest developments on the subject in academia and the ambivalent ways in which the concept is understood today. An initial draft of the text was prepared with the help of some experts in 2019, but a consulta ristretta of the congregation, convened on 8th October of the same year, found it to be unsatisfactory. The Doctrinal Office then prepared another draft ex novo, based on the contribution of various experts, which was presented and discussed in a consulta ristretta held on 4th October 2021. In January 2022, the new draft was presented during the plenary session of the congregation, during which the members took steps to shorten and simplify the text. Following this, on 6th February 2023, the amended version of the new draft was reviewed by a consulta ristretta, which proposed some additional modifications. An updated version was then submitted for the members' consideration during the ordinary session of the Dicastery Feria 4 on 3rd May 2023, where members agreed that the document with some adjustments could be published. Subsequently, Pope Francis approved the deliberations of that session during the audience granted to me on 13th November 2023. On this occasion, he also asked that the document highlights topics closely connected to the theme of dignity, such as poverty, the situation of migrants, violence against women, human trafficking, war, and other themes. To honor the Holy Father's directions, the doctrinal session of the Dicastery dedicated a congresso to an in-depth study of the encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which offers an original analysis and further consideration of the theme of human dignity beyond all circumstances. On 2nd February 2024, a new and significantly modified version of this text was sent to the members of the Dicastery ahead of the ordinary session Feria 4 on 28th February 2024. The letter accompanying the draft included the following clarification. This additional drafting was necessary to meet a specific request of the Holy Father. Namely, he explicitly urged that more attention be given to the grave violation of human dignity in our time, particularly in light of the encyclical Fratelli Tutti. With this, the Doctrinal Office took steps to reduce the initial part and to develop in greater detail what the Holy Father indicated. The text of the current declaration was finally approved during the above-mentioned Feria 4 of 28th February 2024. Then, in the audience granted to me and to Monsignor Armando Matteo, Secretary of the Doctrinal Section, on 25th March 2024, the Holy Father approved this declaration and ordered its publication. The 5-year course of the text preparation helps us to understand that the document before us reflects the gravity and centrality of the theme of dignity in Christian thought. The text required a considerable process of maturation to arrive at the final version that we have published today. In its initial 3 sections, the declaration recalls fundamental principles and theoretical premises, with the goal of offering important clarifications that can help avoid frequent confusion that surrounds the use of the term dignity. The 4th section presents some current and problematic situations in which the immense and inalienable dignity due to every human being is not sufficiently recognized. The Church sees the condemnation of these grave and current violations of human dignity as a necessary measure, for she sustains the deep conviction that we cannot separate faith from the defense of human dignity, evangelization from the promotion of a dignified life, and spirituality from a commitment to the dignity of every human being. This dignity of every human being can be understood as infinite, Dignitas Infinita, as Pope St. John Paul II affirmed in a meeting for people living with various limitations or disabilities. He said this to show how human dignity transcends all outward appearances and specific aspects of people's lives. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis wanted to underscore that this dignity exists beyond all circumstances. With this, he summoned all people to defend human dignity in every cultural context and every moment of human existence, regardless of physical, psychological, social, or even moral deficiencies. The Declaration strives to show that this is a universal truth that we are called to recognize as a fundamental condition for our societies to be truly just, peaceful, healthy, and authentically human. Although not comprehensive, the topics discussed in this declaration are selected to illuminate different facets of human dignity that might be obscured in many people's consciousness. Some topics may resonate more with some sectors of society than others. Nevertheless, all of them strike us as being necessary, because taken together, they help us recognize the harmony and richness of the thought about human dignity that flows from the Gospel. This declaration does not set out to exhaust such a rich and crucial subject. Instead, its aim is to offer some points for reflection that can help us maintain an awareness of human dignity amid the complex historical moment in which we are living. This is so that we may not lose our way and open ourselves up to more wounds and profound sufferings amid the numerous concerns and anxieties of our time. Victor Manuel Cardinal Fernandez, Prefect. Introduction. 1. Dignitas Infinita. Every human person possesses an infinite dignity, inalienably grounded in his or her very being, which prevails in and beyond every circumstance, state, or situation the person may ever encounter. This principle, which is fully recognizable even by reason alone, underlies the primacy of the human person and the protection of human rights. In the light of Revelation, the Church resolutely reiterates and confirms the ontological dignity of the human person, created in the image and likeness of God and redeemed in Jesus Christ. From this truth, the Church draws the reasons for her commitment to the weak and those less endowed with power, always insisting on the primacy of the human person and the defense of his or her dignity beyond every circumstance. 2. This ontological dignity and the unique and eminent value of every man and woman in the world was reaffirmed authoritatively in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, issued by the United Nations General Assembly on 10th December 1948. As we commemorate the 75th anniversary of that document, the Church sees an opportunity to proclaim anew its conviction that all human beings, created by God and redeemed by Christ, must be recognized and treated with respect and love due to their inalienable dignity. The anniversary also provides an occasion for the Church to clarify some frequent misconceptions concerning human dignity and to address some serious and urgent related issues. 3. From the start of her mission, and propelled by the Gospel, the Church has striven to affirm human freedom and to promote the rights of all people. In recent times, thanks to the voices of the pontiffs, the Church has made a deliberate effort to formulate this commitment in more explicit terms, through a renewed call to acknowledge the fundamental dignity inherent in every person. On this point, Pope St. Paul VI affirmed that no anthropology equals that of the Church regarding the human person, particularly concerning the person's originality, dignity, the intangibility and richness of the person's fundamental rights, sacredness, capacity for education, aspiration to a complete development, and immortality. 4. Pope St. John Paul II, during the Third General Conference of Latin America and Caribbean bishops in Puebla in 1979, affirmed that human dignity is a gospel value that cannot be despised without greatly offending the Creator. This dignity is infringed on the individual level when due regard is not had for values such as freedom, the right to profess one's religion, physical and mental integrity, the right to essential goods, to life. It is infringed on the social and political level when man cannot exercise his right of participation, or when he is subjected to unjust and unlawful coercion, or submitted to physical or mental torture, etc. If the Church makes herself present in the defense of, or in the advancement of human dignity, she does so in line with her mission, which, although it is religious and not social or political, cannot fail to consider man in the entirety of his being. 5. Then, in 2010, addressing the Pontifical Academy for Life, Pope Benedict XVI declared that human dignity is a fundamental principle which faith in the crucified and risen Jesus Christ has always defended, especially when, in respect of the simplest and most defenseless people, it is disregarded. On another occasion, speaking to economists, he stated that the economy and finance do not exist for their own sake. They are only an instrument or means. Their sole end is the human person and his or her total fulfillment in dignity. This is the only capital, and it is right to safeguard it. 6. From the start of his pontificate, Pope Francis has invited the Church to believe in a Father who loves all men and women with an infinite love, realizing that he thereby confers upon them an infinite dignity. He has strongly emphasized that such immense dignity is an original datum, something given, that is to be acknowledged faithfully and welcomed with gratitude. Based on this recognition and acceptance of human dignity, a new coexistence among people can be established that develops social relationships in the context of authentic fraternity. Indeed, only by acknowledging the dignity of each human person can we contribute to the rebirth of a universal aspiration to fraternity. Pope Francis affirms that the wellspring of human dignity and fraternity is in the gospel of Jesus Christ. But even human reason can arrive at this conviction through reflection and dialogue, since the dignity of others is to be respected in all circumstances, not because that dignity is something we have invented or imagined, but because human beings possess an intrinsic worth superior to that of material objects and contingent situations. This requires that they be treated differently, that every human being possesses an inalienable dignity is a truth that corresponds to human nature apart from all cultural change. Pope Francis concludes, human beings have the same inviolable dignity in every age of history, and no one can consider himself or herself authorized by particular situations to deny this conviction or to act against it. From this perspective, Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tutti constitutes a kind of Magna Carta of our contemporary tasks to protect and promote human dignity. A fundamental clarification. 7. There is widespread agreement today on the importance and normative scope of human dignity and on the unique and transcendent value of every human being. However, the phrase, the dignity of the human person, risks lending itself to a variety of interpretations that can yield potential ambiguities, and contradictions that lead us to wonder whether the equal dignity of all human beings is truly recognized, respected, protected, and promoted in every situation. This brings us to recognize the possibility of a fourfold distinction of the concept of dignity: ontological dignity, moral dignity, social dignity, and existential dignity. The most important among these is the ontological dignity that belongs to the person as such simply because he or she exists and is willed, created, and loved by God. Ontological dignity is indelible and remains valid beyond any circumstance in which the person may find themselves. When we speak of moral dignity, we refer to how people exercise their freedom. While people are endowed with conscience, they can always act against it. However, were they to do so, they would behave in a way that is not dignified, with respect to their nature as creatures who are loved by God and called to love others. Yet, this possibility always exists for human freedom, and history illustrates how individuals, when exercising their freedom against the law of love revealed by the gospel, can commit inestimably profound acts of evil against others. Those who act this way seem to have lost any trace of humanity and dignity. This is where the present distinction can help us discern between the moral dignity that de facto can be lost and the ontological dignity that can never be annulled. And it is precisely because of this latter point that we must work with all our might so that all those who have done evil may repent and convert. 8. There are still two other possible aspects of dignity to consider: social and existential. When we speak of social dignity, we refer to the quality of a person's living conditions. For example, in cases of extreme poverty, where individuals do not even have what is minimally necessary to live according to their ontological dignity, it is said that those poor people are living in an undignified manner. This expression does not imply a judgment on those individuals, but highlights how the situation in which they are forced to live contradicts their inalienable dignity. The last meaning is that of existential dignity, which is the type of dignity implied in the ever-increasing discussion about a dignified life and one that is not dignified. For instance, while some people may appear to lack nothing essential for life, for various reasons, they may still struggle to live with peace, joy, and hope. In other situations, the presence of serious illnesses, violent family environments, pathological addictions, and other hardships may drive people to experience their life conditions as undignified vis-à-vis their perception of that ontological dignity that can never be obscured. These distinctions remind us of the inalienable value of the ontological dignity that is rooted in the very being of the human person in all circumstances. 9. Finally, it is worth mentioning that the classical definition of a person as an individual substance of a rational nature clarifies the foundation of human dignity. As an individual substance, the person possesses ontological dignity that is at the metaphysical level of being itself. Having received existence from God, humans are subjects who subsist, that is, they exercise their existence autonomously. The term rational encompasses all the capacities of the human person, including the capacities of knowing and understanding, as well as those of wanting, loving, choosing, and desiring. It also includes all corporeal functions closely related to these abilities. Nature refers to the conditions particular to us as human beings, which enable our various operations and the experiences that characterize them. In this sense, nature is the principle of action. We do not create our nature. We hold it as a gift, and we can nurture, develop, and enhance our abilities. By exercising the freedom to cultivate the riches of our nature, we grow over time. Even if a person is unable to exercise these capacities due to various limitations or conditions, nevertheless, the person always subsists as an individual substance with a complete and inalienable dignity. This applies, for instance, to an unborn child, an unconscious person, or an older person in distress. One, a growing awareness of the centrality of human dignity. 10. Already in classical antiquity, an intuition about human dignity emerged from a social perspective that viewed each person as invested with a particular dignity based on their rank and status within an established order. From its origins in the social sphere, the word dignity then was used to describe the differentiated dignity of beings in the cosmos. In this view, all beings possess their own dignity according to their place within the harmony of the whole. Some high points of ancient thought did begin to acknowledge a unique place for humans as beings endowed with reason, able to take responsibility for themselves and others in the world. Nevertheless, a way of thinking that would be able to ground our respect for the dignity of every human person in every circumstance was still a long way away. 11. Biblical revelation teaches that all human beings possess inherent dignity because they are created in the image and likeness of God. God said, "Let us make man in our own image, after our own likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Genesis 1:26 and 27. With this, humanity has a specific quality that means it is not reducible to purely material elements. Moreover, the image does not define the soul or its intellectual abilities, but the dignity of man and woman. In the relationship of equality and mutual love, both the man and the woman represent God in the world and are also called to cherish and nurture the world. Because of this, to be created in the image of God means to possess a sacred value that transcends every distinction of a sexual, social, political, cultural, and religious nature. Our dignity is bestowed upon us by God. It is neither claimed nor deserved. Every human being is loved and willed by God, and thus has an inviolable dignity. In Exodus, at the heart of the Old Testament, God shows himself to be the one who hears the cry of the poor, sees the misery of his people, and cares for those who are at least and for those who are oppressed. The same teaching can be found in the Deuteronomic Code. Here, the teaching on rights is transformed into a manifesto of human dignity, particularly in favor of the threefold category of the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. The ancient precepts of Exodus are recalled and applied to the moment in the preaching of the prophets, who represent the critical conscience of Israel. The prophets Amos, Hosea, Isaiah, Micah, and Jeremiah have entire chapters denouncing injustice. Amos bitterly decries the oppression of the poor and his listeners' failure to recognize any fundamental human dignity in the destitute. Isaiah pronounces a curse against those who trample on the rights of the poor, denying them all justice. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and the writers who keep writing oppression to turn aside the needy from justice. This prophetic teaching is echoed in wisdom literature. For example, Sirach equates the oppression of the poor with murder. To take away a neighbor's living is to murder him. To deprive an employee of his wages is to shed blood. In the Psalms, the religious relationship with God comes through the defense of the weak and needy. Do justice for the weak and the orphan. Give justice to the poor and afflicted. Rescue the weak and the needy. Set them free from the hand of the wicked. 12. Born and raised in humble conditions, Jesus reveals the dignity of the needy and those who labor. Then, throughout his public ministry, he affirms the value and dignity of all who bear the image of God, regardless of their social status and external circumstances. Jesus broke down cultural and cultic barriers, restoring dignity to those who were rejected or were considered to be on the margins of society, such as tax collectors, women, children, lepers, the sick, strangers, and widows. He heals, feeds, defends, liberates, and saves. He is described as a shepherd who is concerned about the one sheep that was lost. He identifies with the least of his brethren. As you did it to one of the least of these my brethren, you did it to me. In biblical language, the little ones are not only the children, but are also the vulnerable, the most insignificant, the outcast, the oppressed, the discarded, the poor, the marginalized, the unlearned, the sick, and those who are downtrodden by the powerful. The glorious Christ will judge by the love of neighbor that consists in ministering to the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, and the imprisoned with whom he identifies. For Jesus, the good done to every human being, regardless of the ties of blood or religion, is the single criterion of judgment. The Apostle Paul affirms that every Christian must live according to the requirements of dignity and respect for the rights of all people, according to the new commandment of love. 13. As Christian thought developed, it also prompted and accompanied the progress of humanity's reflection on the concept of dignity. Drawing from the rich tradition of the Church Fathers, classical Christian anthropology emphasized the doctrine of the human being as created in the image and likeness of God, and the unique role of the human person in creation. By critically sifting through the inheritance it had received from ancient philosophy, medieval Christian thought arrived at a synthesis of the notion of the person that recognized the metaphysical foundation of human dignity. St. Thomas Aquinas attested to this when he affirmed that person signifies what is most perfect in all nature, that is, a subsistent individual of a rational nature. The Christian humanism of the Renaissance later emphasized this ontological dignity and its preeminent manifestation in free human action. Even in the writings of such modern thinkers as Descartes and Kant, who challenged some of the foundations of traditional Christian anthropology, one can still strongly perceive echoes of revelation. Building upon some recent philosophical reflections about the status of theoretical and practical subjectivity, Christian reflection then came to emphasize even more the depths of the concept of dignity. In the 20th century, this reached an original perspective as seen in personalism that reconsidered the question of subjectivity and expanded it to encompass intersubjectivity and the relationships that bind people together. The thinking flowing from this view has enriched contemporary Christian anthropology. 14. Today, the term dignity is mainly used to emphasize the uniqueness of the human person, incomparable to all other entities in the universe. From this perspective, we can understand how the word dignity was used in the 1948 Universal Declaration, which speaks about the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family. Only this inalienable character of human dignity makes it possible to speak about human rights. 15. To clarify the concept of dignity even further, it is essential to point out that dignity is not something granted to the person by others based on their gifts or qualities, such that it could be withdrawn. Were it so bestowed, it would be given in a conditional and alienable way, and then the very meaning of dignity, however worthy of great respect, would remain exposed to the risk of being abolished. Instead, dignity is intrinsic to the person. It is not conferred subsequently, a posteriori. It is prior to any recognition, and it cannot be lost. All human beings possess this same intrinsic dignity, regardless of whether or not they can express it in a suitable manner. 16. For this reason, the Second Vatican Council speaks of the sublime dignity of the human person, who stands above all things, and whose rights and duties are universal and inviolable. As the opening line of the Conciliar Declaration, Dignitatis Humanae, recalls, contemporary man is becoming increasingly conscious of the dignity of the human person. More and more people are demanding that men should exercise fully their own judgment and a responsible freedom in their actions, and should not be subject to the pressure of coercion, but be inspired by a sense of duty. Such freedom of thought and conscience, both individual and communal, is based on the recognition of human dignity, as known through the revealed Word of God and by reason itself. The Church's magisterium progressively developed an ever greater understanding of the meaning of human dignity, along with its demands and consequences, until it arrived at the recognition that the dignity of every human being prevails beyond all circumstances. 17. The Church proclaims the equal dignity of all people, regardless of their living conditions or qualities. This proclamation rests on a threefold conviction, which in the light of Christian faith gives human dignity an immeasurable value and reinforces its intrinsic demands. 18. The first conviction, drawn from Revelation, holds that the dignity of the human person comes from the love of the Creator, who has imprinted the indelible features of his image on every person. The Creator calls each person to know him, to love him, and to live in a covenantal relationship with him, while calling the person also to live in fraternity, justice, and peace with all others. In this perspective, dignity refers not only to the soul, but also to the person as an inseparable unity of body and soul. Accordingly, dignity is also inherent in each person's body, which participates in its own way in being in imago Dei, in the image of God, and is also called to share in the soul's glory, in the divine beatitude. 19. The second conviction flows from the fact that the dignity of the human person was revealed in its fullness when the Father sent the Son, who assumed human existence to the full. In the mystery of the Incarnation, the Son of God confirmed the dignity of the body and soul which constitute the human being. By uniting himself with every human being through the Incarnation, Christ confirmed that each person possesses an immeasurable dignity simply by belonging to the human community. Moreover, he affirmed that this dignity can never be lost. By proclaiming that the kingdom of God belongs to the poor, the humble, the despised, and those who suffer in body and spirit, by healing all sorts of illnesses and infirmities, even the most dramatic ones, such as leprosy, by affirming that whatever is done to these individuals is also done to him because he is present in them. In all these ways, Jesus brought the great novelty of recognizing the dignity of every person, especially those who were considered unworthy. This new principle in human history, which emphasizes that individuals are even more worthy of our respect and love when they are weak scorned or suffering, even to the point of losing the human figure, has changed the face of the world. It has given life to institutions that take care of those who find themselves in disadvantaged conditions, such as abandoned infants, orphans, the elderly who are left without assistance, the mentally ill, people with incurable diseases or severe deformities, and those living on the streets. 20. The third conviction concerns the ultimate destiny of human beings. After the creation and the incarnation, Christ's resurrection reveals a further aspect of human dignity. Indeed, the dignity of man rests above all on the fact that he is called to communion with God, destined to last forever. Thus, the dignity of this life is not only linked to its beginning, to the fact that it comes from God, but also to its final end, to its destiny of fellowship with God in knowledge and love of Him. In the light of this truth, Saint Irenaeus qualifies and completes his praise of man. The glory of God is, indeed, man, living man, but the life of man consists in the vision of God. 21. Consequently, the Church believes and affirms that all human beings, created in the image and likeness of God and recreated in the Son, who became man, was crucified and rose again, are called to grow under the action of the Holy Spirit, to reflect the glory of the Father in that same image, and to share in eternal life. Indeed, Revelation shows forth the dignity of the human person in all its fullness. 22. Every individual possesses an inalienable and intrinsic dignity from the beginning of his or her existence as an irrevocable gift. However, the choice to express that dignity and manifest it to the full, or to obscure it, depends on each person's free and responsible action. Some church fathers, such as St. Irenaeus and St. John Damascene, distinguish between the image and likeness mentioned in Genesis. This allowed for a dynamic perspective on human dignity that understands that the image of God is entrusted to human freedom so that, under the guidance and action of the Spirit, the person's likeness to God may grow and each person may attain their highest dignity. All people are called to manifest the ontological scope of their dignity on an existential and moral level, as they, by their freedom, orient themselves towards the true good in response to God's love. Thus, as one who is created in the image of God, the human person never loses his or her dignity and never ceases to be called to embrace the good freely. At the same time, to the extent that the person responds to the good, the individual's dignity can manifest itself freely, dynamically, and progressively. With that, it can also grow and mature. Consequently, each person must also strive to live up to the full measure of their dignity. In light of this, one can understand how sin can wound and obscure human dignity, as it is an act contrary to that dignity. Yet sin can never cancel the fact that the human being is created in the image and likeness of God. In this way, faith plays a decisive role in helping perceive human dignity and in accepting, consolidating, and clarifying its essential features. As Benedict XVI pointed out, without the corrective supplied by religion, though, reason, too, can fall prey to distortions, and when it is manipulated by ideology or applied in a particular way that fails to take full account of the dignity of the human person. Such misuse of reason, after all, was what gave rise to the slave trade in the first place, and to many other social evils, not least the totalitarian ideologies of the 20th century. 23. As Pope Francis has recalled, in modern culture, the closest reference to the principle of the inalienable dignity of the person is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which St. John Paul II defined as a milestone on the long and difficult path of the human race, and as one of the highest expressions of the human conscience. To resist attempts to alter or annul the profound meaning of that declaration, it is worth recalling some essential principles that must always be honored. 24. First, while there has been a growing awareness of human dignity, many misunderstandings of the concept still distort its meaning. Some people propose that it is better to use the expression personal dignity and the rights of the person instead of human dignity and the rights of man, since they understand a person to be one who is capable of reasoning. They then argue that dignity and rights are deduced from the individual's capacity for knowledge and freedom, which not all humans possess. Thus, according to them, the unborn child would not have personal dignity, nor would the older person who is dependent upon others, nor would an individual with mental disabilities. On the contrary, the Church insists that the dignity of every human person, precisely because it is intrinsic, remains in all circumstances. The recognition of this dignity cannot be contingent upon a judgment about the person's ability to understand and act freely. Otherwise, it would not be inherent in the person, independent of the individual's situation, and thus deserving unconditional respect. Only by recognizing an intrinsic and inalienable quality in every human being can we guarantee a secure and inviolable foundation for that quality. Without any ontological grounding, the recognition of human dignity would vacillate at the mercy of varying and arbitrary judgments. The only prerequisite for speaking about the dignity inherent in the person is their membership in the human species, whereby the rights of the person are the rights of man. 25. Secondly, the concept of human dignity is also occasionally misused to justify an arbitrary proliferation of new rights, many of which are at odds with those originally defined, and often are set in opposition to the fundamental right to life. It is as if the ability to express and realize every individual preference or subjective desire should be guaranteed. This perspective identifies dignity with an isolated and individualistic freedom. It claims to impose particular subjective desires and propensities as rights to be guaranteed and funded by the community. However, human dignity cannot be based on merely individualistic standards, nor can it be identified with the psychophysical well-being of the individual. Rather, the defense of human dignity is based on the constitutive demands of human nature, which do not depend on individual arbitrariness or social recognition. Therefore, the duties that stem from recognizing the dignity of the other and the corresponding rights that flow from it have a concrete and objective content based on our shared human nature. Without such an objective basis, the concept of dignity becomes de facto subject to the most diverse forms of arbitrariness and power interests. 26. Viewed through the lens of the relational character of the person, human dignity helps to overcome the narrow perspective of a self-referential and individualistic freedom that claims to create its own values regardless of the objective norms of the good and of our relationship with other living beings. Indeed, there is an ever-growing risk of reducing human dignity to the ability to determine one's identity and future independently of others, without regard for one's membership in the human community. In this flawed understanding of freedom, the mutual recognition of duties and rights that enable us to care for each other becomes impossible. In fact, as Pope St. John Paul II recalled, freedom is placed at the service of the person and of his fulfillment through the gift of self and openness to others. But when freedom is made absolute in an individualistic way, it is emptied of its original content, and its very meaning and dignity are contradicted. 27. Human dignity also encompasses the capacity inherent in human nature to assume obligation vis-à-vis others. 28. The difference between humans and all other living beings, which stands out thanks to the concept of dignity, should not lead us to forget the goodness of other creatures. Those beings exist not only for human utility, but also possess a value of their own. They are like gifts entrusted to humanity, to be cherished and cultivated. Thus, while the concept of dignity is reserved for the human being, at the same time, the creaturely goodness of the rest of the cosmos must be affirmed. As Pope Francis points out, by virtue of our unique dignity and our gift of intelligence, we are called to respect creation and its inherent laws. Each creature possesses its own particular goodness and perfection. Each of the various creatures, willed in its own being, reflects in its own way a ray of God's infinite wisdom and goodness. Man must therefore respect the particular goodness of every creature, to avoid any disordered use of things. Furthermore, today we see ourselves forced to realize that it is only possible to sustain a situated anthropocentrism. To recognize, in other words, that human life is incomprehensible and unsustainable without other creatures. In this perspective, it is not a matter of indifference to us that so many species are disappearing and that the climate crisis endangers the life of many other beings. Indeed, it belongs to human beings' dignity to care for the environment, taking particular account of the human ecology that preserves their very existence. 29. These fundamental prerequisites, however necessary, are not enough to guarantee a person's growth consistent with his or her dignity. While God created man a rational being, conferring on him the dignity of a person who can initiate and control his own actions, with a view to our good, our free will often prefers evil over good. Thus, human freedom, in its turn, needs to be freed. In his letter to the Galatians, St. Paul affirms that, for freedom, Christ has set us free, recalling the task proper to each Christian, on whose shoulder rests a responsibility for liberation that extends to the whole world. This is a liberation that, starting from the heart of individual people, is called to spread and manifest its humanizing power across all relationships. 30. Freedom is a marvelous gift from God. Even when God draws us near to him with grace, he does so in a way that never violates our freedom. Thus, it would be a grave error to think that by distancing ourselves from God and his assistance, we could somehow be freed and thus feel more dignified. Instead, detached from the Creator, our freedom can only weaken and become obscured. The same happens if freedom imagines itself to be independent of any external reference and perceives any relationship with a prior truth as a threat. As a result, respect for the freedom and dignity of others would also diminish. As Pope Benedict XVI explained, a will which believes itself radically incapable of seeking truth and goodness has no objective reasons or motives for acting save those imposed by its fleeting and contingent interests. It does not have an identity to safeguard and build up through truly free and conscious decisions. As a result, it cannot demand respect from other wills, which are themselves detached from their own deepest being and thus capable of imposing other reasons, or, for that matter, no reason at all. The illusion that moral relativism provides the key for peaceful coexistence is actually the origin of divisions and the denial of the dignity of human beings. 31. Moreover, it would be unrealistic to posit an abstract freedom devoid of any influence, context, or limitation. Instead, the proper exercise of personal freedom requires specific conditions of an economic, social, juridic, political, and cultural order, which often remain unfulfilled. In this sense, we can say that some individuals enjoy more freedom than others. Pope Francis has given special attention to this point. Some people are born into economically stable families, receive a fine education, grow up well-nourished, or possess naturally great talent. They will certainly not need a protective state. They need only claim their freedom. Yet the same rule clearly does not apply to a disabled person, to someone born in a dire state of poverty, to those lacking a good education and with little access to adequate health care. If a society is governed primarily by the criteria of market freedom and efficiency, there is no place for such persons, and fraternity will remain just another vague ideal. Therefore, it is crucial to understand that removing injustices promotes human freedom and dignity at every level of human endeavor. To enable authentic freedom, we must put human dignity back at the center and, on that pillar, build the alternative social structures we need. Similarly, freedom is frequently obscured by a variety of psychological, historical, social, educational, and cultural influences. Real and historical freedom always needs to be liberated. One must, moreover, reaffirm the fundamental right to religious freedom. 32. At the same time, human history shows clear progress in understanding human dignity and freedom, albeit not without shadows and risks of regression. Such advancement in understanding human dignity is demonstrated by the fact that there is an increasing desire to eradicate racism, slavery, and the marginalization of women, children, the sick, and people with disabilities. This aspiration has been bolstered under the influence of the Christian faith, which continues to be a ferment even in increasingly secularized societies. However, the arduous journey of advancing human dignity remains far from completion. 33. In light of the previous reflections on the centrality of human dignity, the final section of this declaration addresses some specific and grave violations of that dignity. It does so in the spirit proper to the Church's magisterium, which has found full expression in the teaching of the recent pontiffs, as mentioned previously. For example, Pope Francis, on the one hand, tirelessly reminds us of the need to respect human dignity. Every human being has the right to live with dignity and to develop integrally. This fundamental right cannot be denied by any country. People have this right even if they are unproductive or were born with or developed limitations. This does not detract from their great dignity as human persons, a dignity based not on circumstances, but on the intrinsic worth of their being. Unless this basic principle is upheld, there will be no future either for fraternity or for the survival of humanity. On the other hand, he never ceases to point out the concrete violations of human dignity in our time, calling us each to awaken to our responsibility and the need to engage in a concrete commitment in this regard. 34. In addressing some of the many grave violations of human dignity today, we can draw upon the teachings of the Second Vatican Council, which emphasized that all offenses against life itself, such as murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, and willful suicide, must be recognized as contrary to human dignity. Furthermore, the Council affirmed that all violations of the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation, physical or mental torture, undue psychological pressures, also infringe upon our dignity. Finally, it denounced all offences against human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, degrading working conditions where individuals are treated as mere tools for profit rather than free and responsible persons. Here, one should also mention the death penalty, for this also violates the inalienable dignity of every person, regardless of the circumstances. In this regard, we must recognize that firm rejection of the death penalty shows to what extent it is possible to recognize the inalienable dignity of every human being, and to accept that he or she has a place in this universe. If I do not deny that dignity to the worst of criminals, I will not deny it to anyone. I will give everyone the possibility of sharing this planet with me, despite all of our differences. It is also fitting to reaffirm the dignity of those who are incarcerated, who often must live in undignified conditions. And finally, it should be stated that even if someone has been guilty of serious crimes, the practice of torture completely contradicts the dignity that is proper to every human being. 35. While not claiming to be exhaustive, the following paragraphs draw attention to some grave violations of human dignity that are particularly relevant. 36. One of the phenomena that contributes significantly to denying the dignity of so many human beings is extreme poverty, linked as it is to the unequal distribution of wealth. As Pope St. John Paul II emphasized, one of the greatest injustices in the contemporary world consists precisely in this, that the ones who possess much are relatively few, and those who possess almost nothing are many. It is the injustice of the poor distribution of the goods and services originally intended for all. Moreover, it would be misleading to make a cursory distinction between rich and poor countries, for Benedict XVI recognized that the world's wealth is growing in absolute terms, but inequalities are on the increase. In rich countries, new sectors of society are succumbing to poverty, and new forms of poverty are emerging. In poorer areas, some groups enjoy a sort of superdevelopment of a wasteful and consumerist kind, which forms an unacceptable contrast with the ongoing situations of dehumanizing deprivation. The scandal of glaring inequalities continues, where the dignity of the poor is doubly denied because of the lack of resources available to meet their basic needs and the indifference shown towards them by their neighbors.